Ladies and gentlemen, hit subscribe to this channel right now. The Supreme Court has never had, there's no Supreme Court precedent. They've never had a case or a ruling that affirms pardons given to people by anyone other than the President of the United States of America. The Constitution specifically states that the President, not his staff, not his chief of staff or top staffers or aides, can help him pardon anyone or can issue a pardon. The GOP committee, the House Oversight Committee, just found that there's no evidence that Biden himself ordered a number of these pardons, and that his mental decline, which is why he was forced out by the Democratic Party, Democrats themselves forced out Biden, his mental decline makes it impossible to have many of the pardons or all the pardons constitutional. Hit subscribe to this channel right now. Go to H.A. Goodman's other channel. Check this out. Right after this, go to H.A. Goodman's other channel for the synopsis of this live stream. To my super chat. Your super chat is greatly appreciated. If you want to talk about the constitutionality of Biden's pardons, let's do so. Any topic within reason. If you want to ask any question or topic or make a statement within reason via super chat, it's greatly appreciated, people. Let's get started. These pardons are almost certainly all unconstitutional because of Biden's mental decline and the recent interviews / depositions by the House Oversight Committee. Check it out.
Let's bring in constitutional attorney Mark Smith. Mark, thank you so much for being here. This story just keeps on going and going. Let's bring up this snippet from this Axios report that says that there were people within the Biden administration who had major concerns about this. Quote, an email from Biden's chief of staff, Jeff Zients, at 10:31 p.m. the night of January 19th, less than 14 hours before Biden was to leave office, confirmed the use of the presidential auto pen for those pardons. I approve the use of the auto pen for the execution of all of the following pardons. Thanks, Jay-Z. That was an...
So the initials Jay-Z, the initials of the top staffer, chief of staff, he's not the president. He cannot approve the use of auto pen. The chief of staff cannot approve the use of auto pen. So right there, that's a big problem in terms of the Constitution.
Email from Biden's chief of staff. What do you make of this latest Axios report, Mark?
Brian, I think the big picture here is this is very good news politically and legally for President Donald Trump. As you know, there are a series of these Supreme Court cases over the power of the president to control Article 2, the executive branch. And historically, in the last several decades, Brian, as you know, the deep state, these unelected bureaucrats have been running amok, controlling the executive branch and running the government in many respects. And this is just a more recent example and a very good example to highlight the problems with an unelected people run the auto pen, run the White House, and so on. And I think all this is going to be very good in terms of atmospherics to helping Donald Trump continue to win these cases before the Supreme Court. Because the one thing Donald Trump is doing very, very well is reminding people that as the president of the United States, all of the executive powers in Article 2 of the Constitution is vested in him as the president, the one person that's elected by all the people, voted on by all Americans. And I think this is very helpful in front of the U.S. Supreme Court, which is why Donald Trump keeps winning before the Supreme Court these questions of executive power and his authority.
According to the Brennan Center, President Trump has won 93%, over 93% of Supreme Court cases. He will win this case as well. It's going to the Supreme Court. He's going to indict a whole bunch of people, almost certainly Schiff, definitely Hillary Clinton within the year or so, according to reports. John Ratcliffe hinted at these types of indictments. But, ladies and gentlemen, he's going to indict many people, almost certainly on the January committee. They're going to go and say this is unconstitutional. It's eventually, of course, federal judges are going to reaffirm the pardons. It's going to go to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is not going to back the pardons from Biden. George Clooney, Democrats, Hollywood, and media, Democrats themselves, after he won his primary, kicked Biden out of office. How could anyone expect the pardons to be constitutional if he was kicked out of office by his own political party or kicked out of the candidacy and usurped by his vice president? How could it be constitutional if they didn't even trust Biden for more than for another 4 years, or just to face President Trump? They kicked him out before November, and the pardons were issued after November of 24. So let's continue.
Well, atmospherics and politics aside, what about legally by the law? Is there any sense here that these more historic, a record number, 4,250 pardons and clemencies that were signed with this auto pen, do they get thrown out the door?
Well, at a very high level, certainly a president is allowed to use an auto pen or an electronic signature. I mean, people use electronic signatures to sign contracts every day in American life, and that is legally fine. But this all assumes, Brian, that the person who is doing this, is signing off on this, is actually approved the use of, in this case, the auto pen. And that really gets into, did Joe Biden actually approve these pardons using the auto pen or not? And I think the only way to know whether or not this is true would be if somebody comes forward from the Biden administration and says, you know what, he really didn't know what was going on. These pardons were being issued with an auto pen by people that lack the authority from the president to do so. And it's going to be very difficult to get those inside facts, I suspect, but the Oversight Committee is certainly working on trying to get to the bottom of this. But the question is, did Joe Biden as president really authorize these or not? That's the factual question that's key.
The president says he knows exactly what he signed. That has been his position. What makes this story important is that you see pushback from within the administration, emails that show a confusion about the use of the auto pen, and wondering and questions about why it's being used. And so that's why this story is important. Also, the issue of pardons and clemency that really stuck out at me was that there was real DOJ officials had no idea about who was getting these clemencies. In fact, some of these people, DOJ said, were murderers. They were not nonviolent folks, as the president said that they were. And that really stuck out to me. Let's play this from Lydia Moynihan, who talked about this, one of the contributors here at Fox.
You're talking about almost 4,500 pardons that were issued. And to some of them, it was murderers, it was violent criminals, it was people with violent drug histories. They weren't vetting any of those folks who were being pardoned. Again, that raises concerns about who these people are, whether they deserve to be free. And so I think we need answers about who was released, why they were released, and who ultimately is responsible for it.
Mark, your reaction?
Well, look, the Department of Justice works for the President of the United States. They're not an independent branch of government. So at the end of the day, whether or not the Department of Justice is directly involved or not with the pardon process really doesn't matter. If the president wants to give someone a pardon or grant clemency, he has the authority to do so, which goes back to, did Joe Biden really sign off on this or not? Now, usually the Department of Justice.
So the question is, was he aware that he auto-signed, or he ordered an auto-sign of a pardon for CHENEY and SCHIFF and the unselect committee, or the select committee? President Trump calls it the unselect committee for good reason. They withheld exculpatory evidence and allegedly deleted and destroyed government documents, possibly classified data, or just government records. Maybe not classified, but government records. And this is the same political party that issued clemency to murderers. Okay, they're against capital punishment, but not for conservative pundits. According to the celebration of wonderful, morally superior liberal Democrats you've seen online. So when Charlie Kirk, when he was assassinated, you saw all these people on the left, Democratic pundits or just regular individuals, lose jobs. In the most disgusting manner, celebrate his death. And yet their political party issued clemency for the most heinous murderers during Biden, in addition to all the pardons with the auto pen, Fauci, Schiff, CHENEY, and others. But was he aware? That's the question. Did he know what he was? Did he know what he was auto pen signing? Okay, and the auto pen can be used, but it was used more with Biden than any other president ever. Why maybe there was an issue with his mental or cognitive abilities.
Is involved. They put together the paperwork, they put together the documents for the president to sign, but the fact that they didn't do it, arguably, doesn't change the legal nature of this. At the end of the day, did Joe Biden sign off on these or not? He is allowed to pardon hundreds, if not thousands of people. He has that legal authority under the Constitution itself, but that's a separate question from whether or not he really did it, really intended this, and signed on with this. And of course, that's what the Oversight Committee is trying to get to the bottom of. Did Joe Biden know what he was doing, and did he approve these pardons or not? The presumption is they're lawful, but that doesn't mean that presumption cannot be overcome, of course.
And as you said, this was done in a process.
And naturally, the presumption is that they're lawful because it's he was the president. He was essentially he was apparently the president, but he had a bunch of staff and this cocoon around him where we don't know who was running the country. Okay, again, this is completely outlandish. This would never happen with President Trump or any of President Trump's voters. Millions of people did not vote for an entire staff around President Trump. They voted for President Trump to ensure we don't get into never-ending military conflict. And you know what? He's trying to prevent the flow of narcotics into the country. A little bit different from never-ending counterinsurgency conflicts, but I do agree. I don't want any land war anywhere. But there isn't going to be one. Hopefully, thank God, there won't be one. But the point is, he is not as militant as the Democratic Party, who the invasions took place under Democrats. Biden, one of the largest invasions in generations under Biden. Okay, the Russians invaded under Joe Biden. Yet again, all the nonsense that you've heard from media and the Democratic Party is just that. The largest invasion in generations was conducted by Russia while Biden was in office. Okay, that wouldn't have happened with Trump. Didn't happen with Trump in his first term. Okay, he was elected for his foreign policy, President Trump. His economic policy, tariffs, bringing home manufacturing jobs and other jobs so we don't outsource the entire U.S. American economy, the entire American economy out of this country. Okay, he doesn't want to outsource all these jobs, thousands and thousands and thousands of jobs out of the country. He wants tariffs. He's implementing tariffs to ensure that AI, doesn't completely take over manufacturing and every other industry, along with outsourcing. And so foreign policy, economic policy, and enforcing immigration laws, those three things, ladies and gentlemen, can define President Trump, not the people around him. Nobody knows what defined Biden's presidency other than this quest for power by his political party. The political party catapulted Biden, and then they threw him politically to the curb. And the question is, are these pardons constitutional? Almost certainly they're not. Check this out.
I want to go live now to Capitol Hill, where the Oversight Chairman, James Comer, has just popped out of the recorded transcribed interview with Ian Sams, a former aide of former President Biden. Let's listen in.
Did Joe Biden tell you this? Did Joe Biden send you an email himself? Well, no. So it raises serious concerns and serious questions about who was calling the shots in the White House. If the White House spokesperson is being shielded from the President of the United States, who was operating the Oval Office? I mean,
and who was operating the auto pen? Who controlled the auto pen? Or who controlled the presidency? But who controlled the auto pen?
This is what this whole investigation is about. That auto pen was used excessively, and yet no one can say for certain that Joe Biden was given was given the orders to use the auto pen. And if you're using the auto pen to sign one document and Joe Biden's in the White House 75% of the time when the document's used, why not have Joe Biden sign the document right there? Why have to go through all the bureaucracy of using the auto pen? I mean, this was a huge interview today, and I think it contradicts everything that the former Biden people are saying with respect to the president's mental fitness. There were very few people that were around Joe Biden especially at the end. And that's when the majority of the pardons and executive orders were signed with that audit pen. I mean, I can't say this enough. I want to say this one more time so everyone understands. Ian Sams, who was the White House spokesperson for a significant amount of Joe Biden's time as president, interacted with him 2 times. 2 times. So, you know, we're going to continue to bring people in. And again, this person, Ian Sams, is the one that would counter everything Robert Hur, or anytime anyone would suggest that Joe Biden wasn't mentally fit, he would say, no, he's at the top of his game. Every time he tweeted out, and several times he gave interviews on MSNBC. Every time I've interacted with the president, he was sharp. He asked great questions. In there, under oath, he interacted with the president 2 times, the entire time. The entire time he worked in the White House. That's astonishing. Any questions?
Did he tell you what those 2 times were? Like, do you know what those 2 interactions
No,
were?
he really didn't have a good memory of the 2 times he interacted with the president, which would make me think that he didn't interact with him very long. Let this sink in. Not only did Robert Hur interact longer with Joe Biden than Joe Biden's own spokesperson, I interacted more with Joe Biden than Joe Biden's spokesperson. I flew on Air Force One with Joe Biden to Kentucky when we had a tornado. I talked to him on Air Force One. Ian Sams never flew on Air Force One. Do you recall a president's spokesperson not traveling with the president when he traveled? He never went on Air Force One. I've been on Air Force One with Joe Biden.
Did he say, though, in his 2 interactions with him that the president was mentally sharp?
John, thank you so very much. To my super chat, greatly, greatly appreciated. John, thank you as always. Let's continue.
Oh, of course he did. Yeah, well, he had to. He said that in front of you all 100 times.
But in there, when he announced you'd only been with him twice, during those 2 times, did he describe the president as mentally
Well,
sharp?
he had to, absolutely, because he said that, for hours and hours and hours of press conferences and TV interviews on MSNBC and CNN.
Did you get any indication about what kind of legal advice the White House counsel, I mean, he was a spokesperson, like what the White House counsel was giving Biden as far as legal advice for using?
Well, he said that most of his talking points came from White House counsel. So, again, this is the president's spokesperson who has no communication with the president. It leads to further concern that Joe Biden was not the one calling the shots. And that's what this entire investigation is about. We went through lines in the Hur report where Hur specifically stated that the president's memory was poor, his ability was limited. And and then I went back and asked questions about the Biden investigation, the influence peddling investigation, because if you'll recall, he attacked me every day, saying that there was no evidence and all this. I said, do you stand by that? And he never would answer the question. I said, were you surprised that Joe Biden pardoned his entire family? And he said he was surprised. I said, is that an admission of guilt? So he pardoned the spouses. The only place in the world the spouses were ever mentioned was in our final report. And he pardoned the entire family. It is his last act as president. And I think that everyone in America knows that was an admission of guilt. So, again, I think this is explosive. When you all read the transcript, I think you will agree. This was the White House spokesperson. It just pours fuel on the fire that Joe Biden was.
So you're listening live there to Oversight Committee Chairman in the House, James Comer, who stepped out for a brief moment to update reporters on this transcribed interview with Ian Sams, the former aide to former President Biden.
Former Chief of Staff Ron Klain sat down for a marathon grilling behind closed doors on Capitol Hill. He reportedly said that Biden was, quote, less energetic and had a worse memory late in his term. Klain also revealed that Hillary Clinton didn't think Biden was, quote, politically viable. Lara Trump joins me now. Lara, it seems like we're beginning to get some answers on Biden's decline, but we still don't know who is actually running the government, do we?
We still do not know that. And Stuart, think about how terrifying a statement that is to say that we really don't know, at least for the last little bit of Joe Biden's presidency, who is running things. I do think the information we got yesterday is helpful. It's helpful for people not to plead the fifth. So I'm appreciative that Ron Klain actually gave a little bit of information. And at the base of this, at the heart of all of this, is really that question: who was actually making the big decisions and who had the authority to use that auto pen? Was Joe Biden? They say he gave verbal authority. Was he within his right mind when he gave that verbal authority to use the auto pen? Do those pardons and executive orders that he signed with that auto pen actually hold up in a court of law? If they get more people like Ron Klain in there testifying that Joe Biden really wasn't as with it as maybe they advertised to the American public, they could take that to a court, and a court could say, you know what, we're going to rescind those executive orders and those pardons. So I'm sure a lot of people are paying very close attention to that.
Very.
So we can get back to let's go really quickly to all right, so this is Biden's doctor. This is thrilling testimony. Check this out.
Go on the record. Good morning, everyone. This is a deposition of Dr. Kevin O'Connor conducted by the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform under the authority granted to it pursuant to House Rule 10 and the rules of the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform. Accordingly, House Rule 10 grants the committee broad jurisdiction for the committee to conduct investigations of any matter at any time. On May 22nd, 2025, Chairman Comer requested a voluntary interview of Dr. O'Connor as part of the committee's investigation into President Biden's alleged mental and physical decline, the Biden White House's efforts to hide that from the American people, and any unauthorized executive actions. The committee is considering legislative solutions to address these issues, including changes to the 25th Amendment to the Constitution. I will enter this initial request by Chairman Comer as Exhibit 1. On June 4th, counsel for Dr. O'Connor responded to the Oversight Committee. In the letter to the committee, counsel stated Dr. O'Connor could not appear for the requested interview. I will enter this as Exhibit 2. On June 5th, Chairman Comer issued a subpoena for Dr. O'Connor to appear for this deposition. In that cover letter, the committee addressed various claims of privilege raised by Dr. O'Connor's counsel. The committee notified Dr. O'Connor that none of the legal arguments raised by Dr. O'Connor's counsel were tenable. I will enter both the subpoena and the accompanying cover letter to Dr. O'Connor as Exhibit 3.
Thank you.
Paul, thank you so very much. Paul in Australia, thank you for your super chat and for always watching, your support. Greatly appreciated. Let's continue. This is the deposition of President Biden's doctor.
The committee noticed today's deposition on July 3rd, 2025. I will enter the notice for this deposition as Exhibit 4. I will also introduce as Exhibit 4 the notice of a change of room to where we are sitting right now.
Margaret Harker, Senior Advisor for the Majority.
Mark Marin, Staff Director for the
Majority, which were furnished to your counsel. This regulation is incorporated into the rule.
On the advice of counsel.
And to assert both.
So the thrilling testimony starts now.
Privileges with regard to any questions that would be asked at this deposition. And Dr. O'Connor will not answer any questions.
Can we go off the record for 1 second?
Go back on the record. The clock will stop if the witness needs to confer with counsel, when your counsel is speaking, and when members or staff are speaking during the opposing side's rounds of questions. We will alternate back and forth until there are no more questions. Do you understand?
On the advice of counsel, I must respectfully decline to answer in reliance on my right under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution. I am not a lawyer. I must follow my lawyer's advice in this matter.
There's a court reporter taking down everything I say and everything you say to make a written record of the deposition. For the record to be clear, please wait until the staffer questioning you finishes each question before you begin your answer, and the staffer will wait until you finish your response before proceeding to the next question. Further, to ensure the court reporter can properly record this deposition, please speak clearly, concisely, and slowly. Also, the court reporter cannot record nonverbal answers, such as nodding or shaking your head, so it is important that you answer each question with an audible, verbal answer. Do you understand?
On the advice of counsel, I must respectfully decline to answer in reliance on my right under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution. I am not a lawyer, and I must follow my lawyer's advice in this matter.
Exhibits may be entered into the record. Majority exhibits will be identified numerically. Minority exhibits will be identified alphabetically. We want you to answer our questions in the most complete and truthful manner possible, so we will take our time. If you have any questions or do not fully understand the question, please let us know, and we will attempt to clarify, add context to, or rephrase our questions. If we ask about specific conversations or events in the past and you are unable to recall the exact words or details, you should testify to the substance of those conversations or events to the best of your recollection. If you recall only a part of a conversation or event, you should give us your best recollection of those events or parts of conversations that you do recall. You are required by law to answer questions from Congress truthfully. This also applies to questions posed by congressional staff in this deposition. Do you understand?
On the advice of counsel, I must respectfully decline to answer in reliance on my right under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution. I am not a lawyer. I must follow my lawyer's advice in this matter.
If at any time you knowingly make false statements, you could be subject to criminal prosecution, including but not limited to perjury. Do you understand?
On the advice of counsel, I must respectfully decline to answer in reliance on my right under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution. I am not a lawyer. I must follow my lawyer's advice in this matter.
Sorry. Ma'am, will you identify yourself for the record?
Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, Texas 30.
Thank you, ma'am. You cannot tell half-truths or exclude information necessary to make statements accurate. You are required to provide all information that would make your response truthful. A deliberate failure to disclose information can constitute a false statement or perjury. Do you understand?
On the advice of counsel, I must respectfully decline to answer in reliance on my right under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution. I am not a lawyer, and I must follow my lawyer's advice in this matter.
Is there any reason you are unable to provide truthful testimony in today's deposition?
On the advice of counsel, I must respectfully decline to answer in reliance on my right under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution. I'm not a lawyer, and I must follow my lawyer's advice in this matter.
The federal rules of evidence in criminal and civil procedure are not applicable for today's deposition. Under the House deposition regulations, a witness's attorney may not instruct a witness to refuse to answer a question except to preserve a privilege. Please note that if you wish to assert a privilege over any statement today, that assertion must comply with the rules of the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform. Pursuant to that, Committee Rule 16C1 states, for the chair to consider assertions of privilege over testimony or statements, witnesses or entities must clearly state the specific privilege being asserted and the reason for the assertion on or before the scheduled date of testimony or appearance. I will enter as Exhibit 5 a letter dated July 8th, 2025 to your counsel from Gary Lakowski, Deputy Counsel to the President, informing you that President Trump has determined not to assert executive privilege over issues regarding your assessment of President Biden's fitness for office and your financial relationship with the Biden family. For the purposes of the deposition, objections must be stated concisely in a non-argumentative and non-suggestive manner. If the witness refuses to answer a question to preserve a privilege, the committee may seek a ruling from the chair. If the chair overrules any such objection, the witness shall be ordered to answer. Do you understand?
On the advice of counsel, I must respectfully decline to answer in reliance on my right under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution. I am not a lawyer, and I must follow my lawyer's advice in this matter.
If the witness continues to refuse to answer a question despite being ordered to do so, the witness may be subject to sanction. Do you understand?
On the advice of counsel, I must respectfully decline to answer in reliance on my right under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution. I'm not a lawyer, and I must follow my lawyer's advice in this matter.
Finally, I will note for everyone here today that the contents of what we discuss in the deposition are confidential under the House deposition regulations. Under the rules, the chairman and ranking minority members shall consult before any release of testimony or transcripts, including portions thereof. This means it is a violation of House and committee rules to disclose contents of this deposition prior to its official release. Can the reporter please swear in the witness?
Will you raise your right hand for me? Do you solemnly declare and affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll go off the record. Dr. O'Connor, were you ever told to lie about the president's health?
On the advice of counsel, I must respectfully decline to answer based upon the physician-patient privilege and in reliance on my right under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution.
I'm not saying the doctor has done anything wrong. I'm not saying the doctor, Biden's doctor, is in any legal peril. I'm simply asking the following question. How on earth is that in any way legally precarious, or how would that put him in any legal jeopardy? Simply answering the following question with a no is not difficult.
Thank you. We'll go off the record.
Why doesn't he say no?
Dr. O'Connor, were you ever told to lie about the president's health?
On the advice of counsel, I must respectfully decline to answer based upon the physician-patient privilege and in reliance on my right under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution. I am not a lawyer. I must follow my lawyer's advice in this matter.
Let the record reflect that Dr. O'Connor has invoked the Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. Dr. O'Connor, please be very clear. Are you declining to answer the question put to you solely on the ground that you believe the answer will incriminate you?
On the advice of counsel, I must respectfully decline to answer based upon the physician-patient privilege and in reliance on my right under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution. I am not a lawyer, and I must rely on my lawyer's advice in this matter.
Dr. O'Connor, did you ever believe the president was unfit to execute his duties as president?
On the advice of counsel, I must respectfully decline to answer based on the physician-patient privilege and in reliance on my right under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution. I'm not a lawyer, and I must follow my lawyer's advice in this matter.
Let the record reflect that Dr. O'Connor has invoked the Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. Dr. O'Connor, please be very clear. Are you declining to answer the question put to you solely on the ground that you believe the answer will incriminate you?
On the advice of counsel, I must respectfully decline to answer based upon the physician-patient privilege and in reliance on my right under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution. I am not a lawyer. I must follow my lawyer's advice in this matter.
Dr. O'Connor, is it your intention to decline to answer all questions put to you today by the committee on the basis of the Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination?
On the advice of counsel, I must respectfully decline to answer based upon the physician-patient privilege and in reliance on my right under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution. I am not a lawyer, and I must follow my lawyer's advice in this matter.
So Biden's doctor pleaded the fifth when he was asked if he was told to lie on behalf of Biden to protect the political party. This is another staffer talking about the auto pen. Let's see if we can derive more information from this deposition or interview.
But
they're not terribly interesting.
Does that mean you haven't operated an
I
auto
have
pen?
operated an auto pen before.
We have some questions for you.
Yes, exactly.
How many different auto pen signatures were tied to the auto pen?
What do you mean?
I mean, one Joseph R. Biden Jr., one Joe Biden, one Joe.
Yeah, what are you?
Something like that.
That is what I mean.
Yeah.
Do you program an auto pen?
Yeah, it is programmed, and I believe they had one or two signatures. But I think this is a better question for David Kalba. But yes, I think they have one or two signatures, and there is an auto pen. Obviously, it's only for letters for the First Lady.
So the one, or just to the best of your the one or two signatures, I know there's some, like the informal letters he sends would sometimes just be signed Joe.
Yeah, I mean,
Like,
I think
obviously it's like
there's
Joseph R. Biden on executive orders and things.
I think there was, as I recall, but I mean, this is like, I don't remember well, so this could easily be wrong, but I believe it was Joe Biden and then Joseph R. Biden were the two signatures. I don't know that there was a Joe, but like there was two, like for letters, he might do Joe Biden. For like executive actions, it would be Joseph R. Biden.
Are you familiar with any, if there was a point in time when one signature changed to another, to a separate signature?
Yeah, I mean, I recall a conversation with David Kalba, and I can't remember his name. There was another office under us who handled records, the Office of Records Management, where there was some discussion of, you change the auto pen once every 2 years. So you go get a new signature.
Is that the physical pen? I think he's asking about the different forms, like Joe Biden versus Joseph R. Biden.
No. So I think like the idea, I think this is, had happened in like, I think we had some discussion where they were like, the standard practice was that in the next 6 months or something, we should get a new signature because signatures change. And the standard practice was to do that every year or two. And I think that I left the job before that happened.
And that's just changing the programming on the auto pen itself.
Yeah, I mean, like you get a new signature from the president and then they program it.
I think we can turn away from the auto pen for right now. I think we'll end our hour here. We have more questions, but we can go off the record for now.
Decision memo. I edited decision memos. That was a core function of my responsibility. That decision book we would, with the briefing book, hand that decision book with the briefing book to Oval Office Operations, and they would get it every night, somewhere between, 5:30, 6:37, whenever the president left.
So this is his chief of staff being questioned, being given some very interesting questions.
Your conversations with Senator Schumer regarding the president's age or health.
Schumer pushed, I think it was Schumer himself, to get the campaign team to come to the Hill and meet with the Democratic caucus. So there were discussions around that, which ended up happening. I believe Jen O'Malley Dillon, Steve Ricchetti, and Mike Donnellan went to the Hill. So he was very pushed on that in a hard way. I can recall him circling back after that, saying that he appreciated the team doing that, but that the caucus was still very, very concerned. And then him wanting time with the president and helping to facilitate that.
So I believe he's talking about when Democrats were ready to remove Biden from the 2024 presidential race and contest. How did they do so in terms of their political party? How did Schumer and Pelosi and others kick Biden out of contention and allow Harris to usurp him, or ask Harris to do so?
And he in fact received time, correct, with the president?
Yes, I believe it was when the president was in Rehoboth.
Do you have an idea of what was conveyed by Senator Schumer to President Biden?
At the time, I did not know for certain. I had assumed that he was going to deliver a pretty tough message. I think he called me to thank me for arranging it. He did not tell me the specifics. But my perception, just based on his skepticism post the caucus, was that it was going to be a difficult message.
Did Senator Schumer ever express his own opinion whether the president should drop out?
No, I think I interpreted it as his own opinion. I don't know if he said but based on how he was presenting the caucus, my takeaway was that the leader was skeptical, at least skeptical about the president staying in the race.
If Schumer was skeptical about Biden staying in the presidential race in 24, how could the pardons be valid? If Democrats themselves did not have confidence in Biden to continue being president, then how on earth are the pardons for everyone constitutionally valid? I could see how Hunter Biden's pardon would be valid, because you would probably, even in Biden's mental state, you could assume that, yeah, he wanted his family and his son to be pardoned. But Schiff and Cheney and the Select Committee and everyone else, Fauci, and murderers on death row, well, maybe, who knows? The Democratic value system is interesting. Democratic Party's value system. But how on earth can America come to terms with the fact that Democrats, George Clooney, Hollywood, media kicked Biden out of contention, but still his pardons are legally and constitutionally valid? How does that work?
And leader Hakeem Jeffries, do you remember any conversations regarding these matters with him? Do you remember any conversations regarding these topics of health or age with leader Jeffries?
Similar, not specific like I just conveyed on Schumer, but like Pelosi, as now the speaker, obviously very concerned about the president's reelection prospects, and worried that the age was the issue, and the debate made it more intense and more front and center, even more intense and even more front and center.
Did leader Jeffries ever express whether he thought it was time for President Biden to drop out of the race?
Not that I recall.
Returning to my general questions, do you remember any other senator expressing a concern strike that. Do you remember any other senator saying they believed that it was time for President Biden to drop out of the race? To you personally?
I would think that's very possible, just given the number of senators I interacted with. Nothing, I don't remember any specific incident, but I would, just given the number of what I just said about the caucus and how that went, whether it was before the caucus or after the caucus, and that many senators were skeptical, and many believed he should get out. I think it's likely, more than possible, that
if Democratic senators were skeptical of Biden's mental fitness, cognitive abilities, and thought he should get out of the presidential race, how on earth are his pardons constitutionally valid? The Constitution states that the president himself has to sign and authorize the pardon, not anyone around him.
someone expressed or multiple expressed that to me, but I don't have any vivid recollection.
What is your understanding as to why the caucus was very concerned about President Biden staying in the race after the debate?
I think there was a level of concern to begin with in terms of age and could he overcome the perception of his age. And then I think there was a belief post-debate that that was not overcomable. And therefore, not uniform, but for those who believe that he should get out, that it was more likely that someone else could be the next president from the Democratic Party than President Biden.
But Biden won his primary, so how could they force him out? He won his primary. Actually, I have to give some respect to the Chief of Staff Zeitz here. He's being as honest, probably more honest than most staffers potentially, but it's like the honest answers or answers that are honest pertaining to Biden point to more questions. So if you hear this, and he's being honest here, the Chief of Staff, Jeff Zeitz, well, you know, there might be other senators that wanted him out after the debate. The Democrats didn't think that he could continue. But how did he win his primary, though? That just doesn't make any sense. How did he win his primary? How could he have won? How could he have won a primary with millions of Democrats voting? How could he be the incumbent, having gained more votes than any candidate in U.S. history in 2020, and then lose all of that support because of one debate? How is that possible?
Is your answer regarding senators expressing their concern, is that applicable to members of the House as well?
Yes, though I took fewer of the House calls. Steve Ricchetti took as the sort of head of congressional relations, many more calls in general. But my calls were more a mix of senators than members of the House.
Besides Nancy Pelosi or Hakeem Jeffries, do you remember any specific calls that you had with House members?
I don't, but it's very possible they occurred.
Do you remember any conversations with members of the cabinet where they expressed that they believe the president should drop out of the race?
Drop out of the race, yes. I don't think any of them were as definitive as drop out of the race, but concerns about could he win.
Do you remember who was?
Can I go backwards one? Because someone did pop into my head. I spoke to Jayapal a fair amount, and I don't recall talking to her specifically then, but remember that there became a progressive caucus meeting with the president. Steve certainly would have been handling most of that, but it is possible that I spoke to more possible than anyone else that I can think of that I spoke to her during that period of time, because I probably spoke to her once every few months in my chief of staff role.
Understood. Who on the cabinet was expressing concerns about the president's ability to win re-election?
I recall Gina Raimondo. I recall, but this is for sort of a different reason. I'm very close to Dennis McDonough. I worked with him when he was chief of staff and I was head of the NEC. We stayed in touch, were friendly in between, and then when I became chief of staff, obviously an incredible advisor to me on how you'd be an effective chief of staff. So I'm certain I talked to Dennis. I don't remember Dennis having a firm view, but we.
All right, let's listen to a little bit of the former White House press secretary.
Did you ever see a change in the president's ability to do the job?
We started off part of your questioning about when I first met him in 2009. I think that he's aged, I've aged. Presidents age in these jobs. It is very common. Obviously, he got older. I spoke to that at the podium. He spoke to that about how he's aged. But when it comes to competency, when it comes to being able to do the job, he was more than capable of doing that. Did he age? We all do. Yes, he did.
And I understand.
But if he was more than capable, why did Democrats remove him from the presidential contest? If he was more than capable, why did he articulate his thoughts in the manner that he did in the debate with President Trump? Why did George Clooney write that op-ed if he was more than capable of fulfilling his duties as president?
No, we all age. We're aging just sitting in this room right now. But
every second.
Every second. But
feels like it.
My question is, did you see a change from in his competency, you brought the word competency, from 2021 to 2025?
I did not see a change in his competency from 2021 to the end of his administration, if that's what you're asking me. So if I have that correct.
Yes, ma'am. So let's expand the scope even further. You've known Joe Biden, interacted with Joe Biden since on a semi-regular basis since 2009. Is it your testimony here today that Joe Biden's competency is the same from 2009 to today?
What I will say is, when I served with him in the 4 years of this administration, he was more than competent to do the job. This is someone who woke up every morning focused on the American people and delivering for the American people, and that's what I saw. I saw someone who cared and did that in a very focused way, and you know, that's why I was honored and privileged to have worked in this administration.
Okay, so as the White House press secretary, maybe some other staffers had closer knowledge of how the pardons or how the auto pen worked, which is, you know, the testimony you saw earlier. Let's wrap it up with this.
Mightier than the sword, but the auto pen is not. President Trump declaring that the pardons issued by former President Biden, including those for the January the 6th committee, are void.
The president posting on Truth Social, quote, the pardons, and that's in quotations, that Sleepy Joe Biden gave to the unselect committee of political thugs and many others are hereby declared void, vacant, and of no further force or effect because of the fact that they were done by auto pen. In other words, Joe Biden did not sign them, but more importantly, he did not know anything about them! Exclamation point.
So this is the amusing manner in which President Trump, it's actually brilliant. The brilliant and amusing manner that President Trump communicates and how his communication style drives his political adversaries completely batty. President Trump knows that the auto pen can pardon anyone. If Biden specifically stated, hey man, use the auto pen, man. So President Trump knows this. That's why he wrote the last line. In other words, Joe Biden did not sign them, but more importantly, this is what he really means. He did not know anything about them. That's the point here. So then the fact check, oh my God, the obsessive, apoplectic fact checking as they're lying about Trump, Russia, and as they're lying about Hunter's laptop, and as they're lying about Trump's quotes, that they distort in reports, as they use anonymous sources to convey absurd allegations like Trump said this, Trump said that, without a shred of evidence, just how like they accused him of being an operative of the Kremlin. As they're doing all of this, the obsessive, apoplectic fact-checking organizations saying, fact check, you must believe us, these are the facts. The auto pen can be used. Yes, the auto pen can be used. Then Trump gets them on a wild goose chase where they're like trying to, prove Trump lied. The reality is that he's writing all of this and he wants the hysterical response because then they lose sight of what he's really talking about, what's really important, what the crux of the matter. He did not know anything about them. That's the issue. That's what makes it. That's why the Supreme Court will back Trump whenever it gets to the Supreme Court. They will say it's null and void because of the GOP investigation, and likely there could be indictments involved. Either perjury. There's got to be there are statutes on that you can't defraud the U.S. I mean, they lied about. There are numerous examples of the Biden White House stating that these videos are deep fakes. This is not true. He's totally fine. Then they kicked him out. So just like when the Clinton campaign wanted Trump, there's a Politico article that says they wanted Trump. And then, of course, they lost. Then it was Russia wanted Trump. Well, how could Russia and the Clinton campaign want Trump? The Clinton emails literally were published by The Guardian, the New York Times, everywhere. The WikiLeaks emails that were published by everybody, where the Clinton campaign wanted to elevate Trump, Dr. Ben Carson, and Ted Cruz. So then suddenly, Russia also wanted to elevate Trump. So, I mean, like, they turn on a dime. Their talking points and their political message completely changes at all times. If it's whenever it suits them, it completely they contradict themselves instantly. So with Biden, it was, oh my God, Biden's fine, and anyone spreading disinformation about his mental decline, it's terrible. Then they kicked him out. So you can indict people by just pointing out all of the official statements stating Biden was fine, knowing that he wasn't fine. But anyway, let's continue. Those are statutes pertaining to defrauding the U.S.
But more importantly, he did not know anything about them! Exclamation point.
And White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt echoed the president's sentiments.
The president was raising the point that did the president even know about these pardons? Was his legal signature used without his consent or knowledge? And that's not just the president or me raising those questions. According to the New York Post, there are Biden officials from the previous White House who raised those questions and wondered if the president was even consulted about his legally binding signature being signed onto documents.
Dagan, I watched that briefing. My favourite part was when Caitlin Collins from CNN said, well, have you got any evidence for this? And Caroline Leavitt says, well, you're a reporter, you find out.
So Mike Davis of the Article 3 Project is awesome. He has a YouTube channel. The Article 3 Project has a YouTube channel. Subscribe there. Brilliant legal analysis. Check this out.
Exactly. Anyway, for more, let's bring in Article 3 Project founder and president Mike Davis. Mike, what do you make of this? Should these pardons be voided?
Well, I would say this. America learns you probably shouldn't elect a demented president, so we shouldn't have to have this discussion. But the reason we're having this discussion is we had demented Joe Biden. So look, politicians use auto pens all the time. House members, Senate members, presidents. The issue here is not the use of the auto pen. It's whether the auto pen was carrying out what the president wanted signed. If it was carrying out the president's will. If you're carrying out the president's will, these pardons are valid. If you're doing this without the president's knowledge or worse, against the president's will, these pardons are not valid. And how you test this is you would have to bring charges against people who were pardoned. The defendants would raise the pardon in court, and then you would litigate whether the pardon is valid in that court.
Do you think it legitimately goes that way to prove whether Joe Biden was, in essence, either he was cognitively aware of what he was doing or disconnected and thinking about something else like pudding?
Well, you look, after Joe Biden and his administration went after Trump, his top aides, and put him in prison, his supporters on January 6th, that we politically persecuted, parents, Christians, let's roll the dice. Let's give it a shot and see if these pardons are valid or not. Maybe we can start with Hunter Biden.
I think there's a broader point here as well, which is just generally what happened during that administration.
So this is 7 months before the GOP House Oversight Committee interviews all of Biden's staff, the doctor, all of that. So there could be perjury. There could be defrauding, statutes associated with defrauding the U.S. See, the White House, the Biden White House, continually stated these were deep fake videos about Biden. He's totally fine. Republicans and others are spreading conspiracy theories, as they always accuse whenever there's legitimate speculation of foul play or corruption within the Democratic Party. So now you have depositions. Now you have congressional testimony. So it's interesting. I think that the Supreme, it'll probably get, hopefully, to the Supreme Court. Once it gets to the Supreme Court, they'll side with Trump like they've done over 93% of the time, because the Constitution does not allow anyone other than the president, and there is a question as to who was actually signing the pardons or who was actually authorizing the pardons.
That was not really done, led, initiated by the person that Americans thought they were elected. We see stories coming out now about the fact that he had to have scripts for meetings with his cabinet secretaries. I mean, it's just unbelievable. There should be a broader investigation into all of that. Another aspect of the changes we're seeing right now, President Trump is slamming a judge.
So really quickly, right here, there's a little snippet. Okay, yeah, there's a snippet of some of the... Okay, check this out.
Looks like President Biden's auto pen had a mind of its own. A House Oversight report revealing that recently uncovered documents and witness testimony indicate that even when a verbal decision was memorialized in an email, it doesn't prove that President Biden had made the decision himself. So the question keeps coming back to this.
And as we started off this live stream, a lot of these emails were, oh, I approve this, said top staffer or chief of staff. That's not constitutional. It would have to be Joe Biden approved it, or Joe Biden would have had to written the email. But God bless him, he probably couldn't write emails. Okay, this is what the Democrats put the country through and put their political party through. They were so desperate to acquire political power that they catapulted a man who had obvious cognitive issues even in 2020, which is why President Trump and every sane person said, how on earth did this man get the most votes of all time? Then all of that political capital, you would think that with all of that support, where you're called a denier. Well, of course, the greatest deniers of elections are the wonderful, morally superior Democrats who not for 1 second, ever acknowledged that President Trump defeated them in 2016 fair and square. But how could he have lost all that political support within 4 years? Let's continue.
If it wasn't Biden, who was making presidential decisions? Well, it turns out Chief of Staff Jeff Zients would often give the sign-off for the auto pen after this lengthy process of telephone calls. For example, in January 2025, Zients says that Biden held a meeting with aides about pardons for his brother and other family members. Now, Zients himself was not in that meeting. Remember, that's actually important. Then Deputy Chief of Staff Bruce Reed or White House counsel Ed Siskel presumably left the meeting and told Zients staffer Rosa Poe about Biden's decision. Poe then called Zients at home to relay the message. So according to this report, Zients did not bother calling the president or anyone else in that meeting to confirm that that actually all happened. He just went on to authorize the use of the auto pen. Someone in the staff secretary's office would then convey that to somebody who would then use the auto pen for the pardons. So, look, how many times did this occur? And again, what did Biden know, if anything, about this process? And then there was the issue of his everyday life being micromanaged by his team, his clothing, his schedule, the number of steps he could walk or climb.
It's your testimony here today that you never just asked somebody, whether it was one of the senior advisors or the vice president, is the president okay?
I never had to ask that question because I saw the president on a daily basis, and I never ever thought I never had that question.
If we're anything like you.
Here with more is House Oversight Committee Chair James Comer. Congressman, thanks for joining us. I mean, to the regular person watching this out there in TV land, this stinks to high heaven. So we need your gut check. You've seen all the documents. Is there any evidence indicating that Biden himself was involved in approving these pardons? Real hard evidence.
There really isn't, and it's astonishing when you're talking about thousands of pardons and dozens of executive orders. Basically, any legal document, especially during the last 3 months of the Biden administration, that's what we focused on. And every person who we deposed had a different story on what the proper process was that they followed in using the auto pen to sign a legal document.
When President Trump states that he verbally declassified documents, he stated that. He could do so verbally, he could even think about it, he said. And you can, there's a Politico article talking about you can verbally declassify documents if you're a president. Biden has never, ever mentioned the pardons. He never stated that, he mentioned, oh, everything's fine, that type of thing, through a spokesperson. He never himself, through his own words, actually him speaking, Biden himself never spoke the words, oh, I authorized the pardon. So it's very different. Very different. The rebuttal would be, yeah, he verbally gave the authority, and that's it. That's that. Well, Biden hasn't said that. And nobody around him has said that either. The difference is a declassified document is different from an actual pardon that needs to be signed. Let's continue.
Their stories were inconsistent, and then when you throw in the emails from the Merrick Garland Department of Justice expressing concern to these very staffers about the excessive use of the auto pen and asking point-blank questions, what was their process, then the entire story's changed. So the inconsistencies are abound, but one thing that is consistent, Laura, is the fact that no one saw Joe Biden, no one who authorized the auto pen or even gave the authorization to use the auto pen, no one who authorized the auto pen or actually physically manually pressed the power button on the auto pen ever heard directly from Joe Biden. And furthermore, there are no notes, there's no chain of custody that would show that Joe Biden was involved in any meetings where they discussed the pardon process. I mean, this is appalling, and everyone in America saw
during the debate and during the last few months of the Biden administration, this was a president in decline. The staffers confirmed that they would go weeks, months, and even years without communicating with Joe Biden. This is a massive cover-up, and what we determined was every pardon should be declared null and void.
Well, back to that point, I want to get into specific pardons in a moment, but that's all well and good to say they're null and void, but I'm a lawyer, so I'm going to ask you this. Is there really any legal means of challenging these pardons? I mean, I don't see any federal court that wants to get involved in what seems to be unknowable with the president's plenary pardon power. I think they're going to call it a political question and say we're not getting involved.
Well, that's why we brought Dr. O'Connor in, the White House physician, and we asked him the first question, Dr. O'Connor, were you ever told to lie about Joe Biden's health? And he pled the Fifth Amendment. We had so many questions about the mental fitness. What we found in the investigation also was the fact that President Biden's staff talked about whether or not they should give him a cognitive test, and then according to the staffers, they ultimately decided to not give him a cognitive test. Now, that makes no sense. If you wanted to prove to the skeptics in the media and the skeptics in the Republican Party that the president was mentally fit for office, why not give him a cognitive test? We wonder whether or not they gave the test and he failed, or did they decide not to give the test because they knew he would fail? Either way, there's no evidence that shows Joe Biden was an active participant in the decision-making process in any of those pardons or executive orders that were signed with the auto pen.
Are you of the view that, for instance, Biden's pardon of his brother, Jim, or let's say Anthony Fauci, are you of the view that those pardons are null and void, given what you know?
I am. Absolutely, 100%. If anyone doubts whether or not there was a cover-up, they need to watch every minute of the testimony that we got, all of the hours and hours of depositions.
Okay, so they have to edit. It's the GOP House Oversight has its own channel. They have to edit because I mean you did see on this live stream, you saw the testimony of Biden's doctor. And you saw the testimony of his chief of staff, which was very interesting. But then the other staffers, I mean, there needs to be an edit and no theme music, because they have like somewhat of an edit. When there's theme music, it's like just give an edit of all the bizarre responses from people under oath. God bless you, Chairman Comer, Congressman Comer, awesome, great American patriot. Please, for the love of God, the Republican House Oversight Committee has to do a better job editing all of the testimony so people can see the very bizarre, inconsistent testimony. And then what? President Trump can go ahead and put it on Truth Social and all of that. But anyway, let's continue. Actually, you know what? Hit subscribe. God bless you. I'll be back later this evening, everybody. This is huge. When it gets to the Supreme Court, it'll eventually get to the Supreme Court because Trump is not playing. And the indictments are going to just flow beyond belief. There's conspiracy statutes. You already have indictments for mortgage fraud, perjury. A whole lot of people will be indicted. You could possibly have Biden staffers in a perjury trap. Or if there's a cover-up, then, you look at emails and like Congressman Comer said, there are no emails where Biden specifically says, pardon this person. So that alone makes it null and void. Anyway, hit subscribe. I'll see you in a couple of hours on this channel. Go to H.A. Goodman's other channel right now.